Hello, everyone. Welcome to Compassionate Christian Voices today and tomorrow. My name is Brian Elaine. I'm the founder of Compassionate Christianity and other projects. It's a pleasure to host this series of prominent Christian authors and activists. Today is the ninth webinar in this series. We'll have additional webinars. Actually, this is the 10th. I'm sorry. This is the 10th in the series. We'll have additional webinars on Tuesday and Thursday next week. Joining us today are Sarah Bessey, Brandan Robertson, and Willard Ashley. Sarah is the author of the best-selling and critically acclaimed books, Jesus Feminist, Out of Sorts, Making Peace with an Evolving Faith, and Miracles and Other Reasonable Things. Her collective book, A Rhythm of Prayer, a collection of meditations for renewal, is a New York Times, Publishers Weekly, and Globe and Mail bestseller. Along with her friends, the late Rachel Held Evans and Jim Chafee, Sarah co-founded Evolving Faith, and she now leads that community and conference alongside Jeff Chu. She also serves as the chair of the board of Heartline Ministries in Haiti. Sarah's writing has appeared in the Washington Post, Huffington Post, The High Calling, Conversations Journal, churchleaders.com, CT Women, Today's Christian Women, and has commented on religion, feminism, and faith deconstruction for The Atlantic, The Christian Post, Christianity Today, The National Post, and The Washington Post, among others. Sarah was born and raised in the prairies and foothills of Western Canada, a beautiful, beautiful area indeed, and now lives in Calgary. Reverend Brandan Robertson is a noted author, pastor, activist, and public theologian working at the intersections of spirituality, sexuality, and social renewal. He currently serves as the lead pastor of Metanoia Church, a digital progressive faith community. Brandan's the author of 7 books on spirituality, justice, and theology, including the Indies Book of the Year Award finalist, True Inclusion, Creating Communities of Radical Embrace. And his latest book is Filled to be Emptied, The Path to Liberation for Privileged People, which I highly recommend. I just finished reading it last week while I was on vacation. Brandan has bylines in publications such as Time Magazine, San Diego Union Tribune, the Huffington Post, NBC, and the Washington Post, and is regularly interviewed in national and global media outlets, including National Public Radio, The Independent UK, and the New York Times. Rolling Stone magazine included him in its annual hot list of top artists, creatives, and influencers who are giving us reason to be excited about the future. Brandan has spoken at the White House, Oxford University, the Parliament of World Religions, and taught at San Francisco Theological Seminary, Disciples Seminary Foundation, and the Lakelands Institute. He's also a fellow of the Salzburg Global Seminar. Named of the Human Rights Campaign as one of the top faith leaders leading the fight for LGBTQ plus equality, Brandan is a founding member of the Union of Affirming Christians and the Global Interfaith Commission on LGBTQ plus Lives. He currently resides in Washington, D.C. Finally, Willard Ashley is founder and CEO of Dr. Willard Ashley Sr. LLC. Under this umbrella, he conducts webinars, counseling, consultation, coaching, and supervision. Willard is the founder and senior pastor of the Abundant Joy Community Church, Jersey City, New Jersey. Reverend Ashley has served as a pastor for 38 years at 4 different congregations. He's a board member at Andover Newton Seminary at Yale Divinity School, board member and faculty of the New Jersey Institute for the Training of Psychoanalysts, vice chair, Bergen County Human Relations Commission. He's a New Jersey and nationally certified psychoanalyst. He's published numerous books and chapters. His latest book is Rules for 21st Century Radicals. Great title. In 2012, Willard was granted tenure and appointed as the first African-American dean of the seminary at the 200-plus year history of New Brunswick Theological Seminary. His memberships include National Association for the Advancement of Psychoanalysis, American Association of Marriage Family Therapists, American Group Psychotherapy Association, and Eastern Group Psychotherapy Society. So, thank you all so much for joining us. It's such a pleasure to have such smart, wonderful people to spend some time with. So thanks so much for joining us. I guess I should also mention that I've collaborated with all these folks on multiple occasions, and really appreciate them being here with us today. I will ask the panelists several questions, but if anyone else would like to also ask questions, please feel free to type them into the Q&A box, and I'll read them verbally so that we get them recorded. So maybe perhaps each of us could tell us a little bit about what your latest project has been, whether it's a book or something else. Sarah, would you mind starting us off?
Sure. Thanks so much for having us. This is exciting. I'm glad to be a part of it. So last book I did was called A Rhythm of Prayer. You mentioned it during that excessively long bio that apparently I sent you. So my apologies. So it came out in February of 2021, and it was actually my first not only my first collaborative book, but it was the first one that I got to serve as not just a contributor, but also an editor for. And so it features prayers from folks like Barbara Brown Taylor, Nadia Boltz-Weber, Amina Brown, Lisa Sharon Harper, Dr. Shaniqua Walker-Barnes, just a number of folks who a lot of the people who are listening are probably familiar with. I think at the heart, the book was meant to be sort of this way to celebrate and honor, but also reimagine, kind of that prayerful tradition of like a prayer circle. I come from more of a charismatic background and still kind of hang on with my knuckles white at times. And it was my hope, I think, to have the book be a bit of a companion for the immense, joys and challenges, I think, of a journey of faith, because I don't know that at any point I thought that when I wanted to write about or grapple with prayer, that it was about giving people a bunch of nice, tidy new prayers to pray, or necessarily a lot of, boundaries or rules or expectations. I think that we were wanting to kind of encompass the full, landscape in a very tender and subversive and honest way. There are so many prayers within the book that honestly, like right from back when it was just emails and stacks of, printed, of Gen X, I'm still printing things off on my printer. I carry them around with me in order to pray. I mean, I remember, Micah Boyett's prayer against efficiency, and, Aaliyah Joy writing about the foolishness of the kingdom and her experiences in prayer within bipolar disorder, and Alicia Crosby writing, a letter from her current self to her future self about prayer in the face of like chronic pain and crisis. I've just revisited those words, over and over again in the years that we've had a chance to work on it. I think like a lot of folks who find themselves in kind of these more, for lack of a better word, like, progressive kind of spaces, we can feel like we lost prayer. And so finding those sorts of pathways, permission, invitation, even companionship and language for kind of the whole experience of prayer from really trusted and wise voices like this was, including everything from our longings and our rage and our joy and our worship and all these things being able to come to kind of the altar of God. And so, yeah, it's been a real journey, both putting it together, I think at the season of life that we've all been in, but then also just kind of shepherding it, really since I've had a great, passion and love for prayer. And so being able to have some of these conversations and see the ways that it has come alongside of people, and oftentimes in very unexpected ways, has been really beautiful and unexpected. So that's the one that probably is the most recent, I guess. So I'll pass along to Brandan or Willard.
Sorry.
Yeah, well, I'm happy
to unmute myself. First of all, congratulations on that, Sarah. And I'm really thrilled at how many copies it's sold. I don't know if you expect.
It was a surprise.
Yeah.
Didn't expect, kind of this, scrappy book of, prayer from, a lot of it's exclusively women within the book to show up and have the kind of resonance that it's had. But I think it shows the longing and the hunger that we have, for this and for these I don't know, just it feels like a really isolating and lonely time, and we lose a lot of the practices and the postures or the people even that have been very precious to us. And so being able to, I was unexpected for the way that it restored and brought some renewal to people, but it's lovely to see, and I'm grateful for it, even if still a little startled.
Well, very good. Brandan, go ahead.
Yeah, well, again, I want to echo, thanks for making this space possible, Brian, and it's so good to be here with all of you. My most recent book came out in February. It was called Filled to be Emptied, The Path of Liberation for Privileged People. And it really came out of me wrestling as a pastor of a church in San Diego for 4 years during the Trump era, to be frank, and to be wrestling with my congregation about how we think about all of the chaos and trauma and all of the things that were calling out to us to respond as followers of Jesus. And so essentially, I found myself back in my office a lot, going through the pages of the Bible, trying to find wisdom from our ancient tradition that could help us think through the major issues of our day. And one of the passages that really helped me not only think through the lens of privilege and racial justice and things like that, but through a lot of different things over the past 4 years, was the famous kenosis passage from Philippians chapter 2, where Paul describes Christ's posture as being one of giving up blessings and power for the good of others and calling those who follow Jesus to have that same mindset. And so after preaching for, I think I did like 8 weeks of a sermon series with my congregation through that passage, I was blown away at how helpful those words were, how healing those words were, and how challenging they were to my community. And so I decided to put it together in a book, and we put it out into the world in hopes that it would help communities of faith primarily have conversations around topics like privilege and implicit bias, and really start exploring these things, not just through the social lens that we see it often talked about in culture and in the media, but from a biblical perspective, from a theological perspective. And yeah, my hope is that it continues to cultivate those conversations and help move people to examine their own privilege and ask how they might utilize it for the good of others to create a more just and equal world.
Well, amen to that. And like I said, it's a great book. I'm just, it says a lot of things that people need to hear that people aren't going to want to hear. So will be interesting to see
thanks
how
for reading it.
Ultimately is received, but it needs to be heard. But what is the story about prophets? There are a lot of sayings about prophets not being accepted in their own city or whatever.
Totally.
In any event, Willard, how about you? What's been latest? You've got a whole set of things that you've launched, I know, over the last couple of years.
Absolutely, Mike. Thank you for having us on, and thank you for allowing me to be part of this conversation with this group of scholars and authors. So my latest book is New Rules for Radicals, T&T for Faith-Based Leaders, Tactics and Techniques. And it's in short, it's a primer on how to organize to impact local communities. And usually people are good at mobilizing. Something bad happens and we can bring 1,000 people and we protest and we march and we say it's really horrible. But then after the protests, after CNN, MSNBC, and maybe Fox News, others show it on television, like, now what? And so I found in my years of teaching students that they were rah-rah on mobilizing. Then I would say, so now that you have the attention of the powers that be, what's your ask? And I'd get this blank stare, like, ask? Well, yes. What do you want? What are your demands, quote unquote? And then I realized that people have very good intentions, but really have no clue how to organize. And so it's really a how-to book on how to organize. And it speaks specifically to faith-based organizations, because those of us that are students of Saul Alinsky and the disciples of Saul Alinsky realize that some of his tactics are not quite the ones that we'd want to practice if we're the pastor, the imam, the rabbi, and have to return to these same group of people on every weekend. And so I begin by saying to people, you have to understand your context, that one size in organizing does not fit all, and that you have to have an appreciation of the history of your congregation, some understanding of your local community, know the politics and the politicians and the various systems that impact your particular geographic location. And that has a starting point, because so many of us have learned in seminary to be social justice minded, go out there and save the world. And then we get out there and find out our congregation's not feeling the same. They can read that lecture. They weren't Bonhoeffer fans. They didn't read Niebuhr, any of those folks. And so like, whoa, what happened? And also part of the book came out of the many protests that have happened over the last 5 years, where people of faith would say, the first day I got arrested symbolically, the board was behind me. That's our pastor. That's our imam. That's our rabbi. Go for it. Second time, they were like, And by the third time, do your real job. Come on the weekends, visit the sick, preach your sermons, etc., and leave that social justice stuff behind. So I try to paint a realistic picture of, if you're going to be involved in social justice work and you're a congregational leader, here's some of the real pitfalls and some of the real challenges that face us. And that, yes, we get many successes, we have victories, but they're hard fought. It doesn't always happen overnight. And so one of my favorite parts of the book is where my colleague and friend of 30 years, pastor, rector, Jeff Curtis, says, well, let's do affordable housing. And that was back in 1987. And Jeff said, well, how hard can it be? And 30 years later, we finally broke ground for affordable housing in Jersey City, Hudson County. And I remember saying to Governor Phil Murphy the story, and he says, and you found out, Reverend, it's very hard. And I said, yes, it's really hard. And again, understanding your context. So the book, it talks about, how do you prepare yourself for the long haul? What are the spiritual disciplines that you need to be able to be sustained? How do you take care of yourself? What's the self-care kind of things you need to do? And at the same time, how do you, you talk about when you get your PhD, how do you sustain an argument over long chapters? Well, how do you sustain the energy over not a couple of days, not a couple of months, but over years of trying to take on evil, trying to take on challenges that have been there for a long time? And at the end of the book, I talk about character from the perspective of, if you win today, on your way to the car, on your way to the train, they're already planning how to undo your victory and not let you win if you have a second bite at the apple. And that's where the character comes in. Understanding that it's important that when you're seduced, if you will, or attempts to seduce you, you have to look past that for the greater good.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, it's a really great book, too. And I think it's such a great need, because there's so many instances of what you're describing where there's been, a bunch of commotion around something, and then it dies off, or, it's difficult to follow it up with action. So the more you can help people do that, I think is just really commendable. So I know, as I mentioned, you guys are all like really smart people, and you all read a lot, I know, in addition to writing a lot. So I'd love to hear what you're reading lately. Brandan, would you like to start that one off?
Yeah, that's hard because I'm not somebody who reads a book cover to cover usually. I'm normally reading 5 or 10 different books, and I'll do a chapter and then come back to it. And I'm looking over at my table next to me now, and one book I just picked up, I'll show you, actually. I have them right here. The 3 books I'm reading right now. So I picked up this book, Unapologetic, A Black Queer Feminist Mandate for Radical Movements. This is one I saw recommended by a number of my friends, and it's been just really incredible as we're doing this work of inclusion and thinking about privilege and justice as white folks, to be doing the work to learn about others' perspectives and learn how others have seen the world. This is an older book that I've been re-diving into, but The Body Keeps the Score. There's been a lot of folks talking about trauma over the pandemic, and there's a lot of collective trauma that we're still going through from everything that's been going on in the world. And I've personally just been seeing that bubble up in my own life recently. And so been digging into the wisdom of that book and learning how the body and really how we're integrated human beings, and our mind, body, and soul all work together, and there are ways that we can bring about healing. And then really beyond that, there's not been a ton of religious books I've been reading in this season. I've kind of go in these different waves of doing like justice and psychology and then doing kind of spirituality and religion. And so right now I've been focusing on these aspects.
Very cool. Very cool. Thank you. Willard, how about you?
I've been reading everything I can get my hands on around the Black church. And part of that is because I think that when you're doing social justice and organizing, that there's a lot of wisdom behind the victories and the challenges of the Black church. I was blessed in my lifetime to go on several trips with Reverend Dr. Wyatt T. Walker, who, as you know, was the chief of staff to Dr. King. And so on those long flights to Korea and South Africa and so forth, he'd give me little kernels of wisdom and kind of insider's look on how they organized and the kind of things that they did. And so I've been trying to do a lot of reading around that, in addition to which kind of my new kind of niche, if you will, is dealing with racial anxiety and racial trauma. And so therefore, everything that Ken Hardy writes or edits or publishes, I've been soaking in and drinking it in, going to all his workshops, etc. And then I think I've really fell in love with the book Black Fatigue, because it just spoke to me. It spoke to my spirit, spoke to my heart, spoke to my head. It's like, yes, 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 exactly. Because she very artfully articulated the feeling as a Black person that's in his 60s and having had parents who experienced lynching, who came from the South because of overt racism, and hearing those stories over and over again, spending time in corporate America and seeing firsthand the ways in which you're devalued. And so just reading that book was just really a grand slam for like, yeah, thank you, thank you, thank you. And so a combination of that and again reading everything I can about the Black church has just been immensely helpful.
The whole area of Black fatigue is something I've certainly learned a lot about, or heard a lot about, because of all the different African American folks that I deal with. And, I understand a little bit more how real that is now. I mean, and anybody, any group of people that's been beating their head against the wall for how long, right? And not getting the kind of action that needs to be taken, it's completely understandable. So, Sarah, how about you? What's been your latest reading list?
I've got a few. First of all, I've been jotting down book titles constantly while we've been talking, so I've got my Post-it notes already. There's a couple of books I was going to mention. The first is one I feel like I cannot seem to shut up about it, and I've talked about it almost everywhere that I've been going lately. It's called This Here Flesh, Spirituality, Liberation, and the Stories That Make Us by Cole Arthur Riley. It is such a beautiful and true and, devastating book, but it's also, it almost is like beyond explanation and description because, listen, I'm a writer, very voracious reader / pseudo hermit bookworm, especially in this, kind of spiritual memoir space. Like that's my lane, right? And I have literally never seen anyone do with language and metaphor what Cole did in that book. I lost count of how many times I underlined, whole passages or dog-eared pages just to write like, wow, like beside it. There's this line that has just haunted me where she wrote that on the day the world began to die, God became a seamstress. And I know that publishing, I think particularly Christian publishing, produces a lot of books these days, and few of us have timelessness. We exist in a moment in time for a moment in time. And we know, I know about myself anyway. But Cole's work, I feel, has that real timelessness that will endure in a way that I don't know that I've really encountered in a long time. So there was that one. I'm also a huge fiction reader. I think stories really matter, maybe especially at this moment in time. And probably the best book that I've read this last year is called Five Little Indians by Michelle Good. It won pretty much every literary award available in Canada, with good reason. It tells the story of 5 kids who were stolen from their families in the 60s scoop and placed in residential church-run schools here in Canada. And then it follows how their lives intersect and entwine after they're released from captivity. It's one of my favorites for the year. I read it in a day because I just couldn't seem to put it down. It was so beautifully written and empathetically understood, compassionate and honest. It felt incredibly important. I felt like I will not ever forget these people and these stories. And this is something that, a lot of us have talked about and known about, but I don't know, there's something really remarkable about this particular book that I wanted to tell people about. And then the last one I was going to mention, I'm a mom of 4. And I was going to mention a book. It's a picture book for kids. I think it's officially for kids, but it's like one of those kinds of books where you're just like, maybe also it will find its way to my nightstand and live there for quite a while because the illustrations are so beautiful and the prose is so lovely, and the scriptural telling that's underneath it is so dense and true that you just want to soak in it a little bit. So it's like it might find its way from my kids' bookshelves and find its way to mine. It's called Mother God by Teresa Kim Pekanovsky. And honestly, it's one of those, it's a beautiful book to read aloud about all the ways that the imagery and the metaphors of God also lend themselves to things like the nursing mother and the heron and the baker and a granny. So looking for scriptural ways to kind of speak of God as a mother that are strong and tender and nurturing, but fierce and wise. It's a beautiful book that I found just, I don't know, for imagination and reimagination and language, it was just exquisite. And it's another one I keep telling people about. So those are a couple for me, although I could talk about books all day long, I'm afraid.
As I think all of us could. So I'll just mention one real quick. This is this other book besides Brandan's that I read during vacation. It's just coming out from Brian McLaren, Do I Stay Christian? The subtitle is A Guide for the Doubters, the Disappointed, and Disillusioned. Really, really great book. So we'll recommend that to everyone too. So let's move on. Kind of thinking big. I'd love for each of you to talk about, of the many serious issues that we see confronting our society today, and there are many and they are very serious. What is the one thing that you think is the most important thing for us to focus on as Christians? I know that's a big question, but I think it's important for us all to keep our priorities of what we're trying to solve, what we're trying to improve on. So Willard, could you start us off on that one?
Yeah, I've been pounding for the last, I guess, since the pandemic. I won't say one thing, but there's these 4 themes, and actually they're all interwoven, which are violence, racial anxiety, disparities, and partisan politics. And at least in America, I think all of them are interwoven. They're all part of the fabric of what we are up against. You can't talk about one without talking about the other, at least in my context and in my worldview. Talk about the violence. I mean, just turn on the television, turn on the radio, look at your 140 character Twitters, etc. It's all over in so many different forms, from the subway shooting or the subway mass attempted shootings to any place in America, to also the violence that takes place on a daily basis to one's mental health. We talk about gun violence and we talk about domestic violence and intimate partner violence, but too often it goes unspoken or in hushed tones about the assault on our brain. To see this constantly, and in some cases to feel as though there's no hope, like the government's not going to fix it, they're too busy bickering, doing partisan politics, even things that make sense they can't agree upon, even voting sometimes against their own self-interest. Say, wait a minute, you realize that people in your state will benefit from this, but I'm going to vote against the wrong party recommended it, so I'm going to vote against it. So those kind of dealing with that, which makes no sense. The racial anxiety. I use that term from the perspective of, yes, there's clearly racism in those issues, but we're afraid of each other. We're afraid of each other. I teach a couple of courses in different places, And I tell people I detest the word microaggression, because when those encounters happen to the person that experiences it, it's not micro, and it stays with you. And you can do all these wonderful things, publish books, have acronyms after your name, all of that stuff. But those racialized aggressions stay with you, and it creates self-doubt. And it has people that are successful by every imaginable measure saying, I don't know if I'm that good because this happened, that happened. And so I think that's part of this conversation, if you will. And then dealing with disparities. I mean, I've just been blown away by people of the African diaspora who are professionals being told, you don't know what's going on for your body. I mean, how do you tell Serena Williams you don't know what's going on in your own body, and go home, little girl, basically? Saying, wait, I'm sorry, number one athlete, number one women's tennis star in the world. I kind of think I know if something's wrong with my body. And imagine, with fame and fortune, if you're being told that, if you have neither fame nor fortune, what happens when you show up in the ER? When you go to your intern and say something's wrong, and you either get misdiagnosed or overprescribed, or both. And so I think through my lens and my context, those four all go together, and those are the kind of the big challenges.
Wow. Yeah, I mean that's part of the problem, isn't it? There's so many fronts of the battle to fight these days. Sarah, what are your thoughts?
Oh, I don't even know if I want to say anything after that. That was so wise. Oh my goodness. I don't know if maybe I kind of, I don't know if I maybe even misunderstood the question to begin with. So I don't know, bear with me, but I think I was kind of approaching this, more from maybe not so much as of a pressing issue, as like a pathway, maybe is the way that I kind of, took a run at it, I guess. I mean, a way that would be rooted in hope and not fear, and despair, in love, rather than the reaction and the othering, right? I hope, right? Anyway, but I was kind of reminded of, probably 10 years ago, being at this conference that was like actually convened on this very topic, like what is the most pressing thing? What do you think we all need to keep in mind as we move into the 21st century? So that shows how long ago that was. And being one of two progressive voices. I remember it was like me and Nadia Bolz-Weber, and we were in the room and they said, what do you think we need to do? And Nadia was like, you all need to go to church. And I said, everybody needs to follow Jesus. So I don't know if it was quite what they had in mind when they invited us kind of as like the outliers in the room, but I've kind of laughed about it in the years since. And I think the reason why is, I don't know, like there's so many issues that are pressing us right now. And I know that probably every generation looks back and says something very similar, whether it's climate change and violence, war and poverty and patriarchy. I'm still charismatic enough that I often characterize these as like powers and principalities. I don't know what other language sometimes to use for these forces that feel like they are amassing against us and our neighbors and our communities. And so it's not so much that I want to be reductive or dismissive. That's not my posture at all. But I still find, there's this line from Jesus in the book of Matthew where he talks about the unenforced rhythm of grace. That if you're weary and your burden is heavy, to come away with him and walk with him and watch how he does it. And there's, I think, still a real invitation to Jesus's way of being human that I find really illuminating in the midst of all of the pressing issues that we are grappling with and encountering, right? A vision that includes, I think it's Indigenous theologian Randy Woodley that calls that like the community of creation, right? Something that includes not just us, but like the community of us and the land. And, so, I mean, I think for me, when I look at this, like one of the things I used to say years ago was that, it was following Jesus that made a feminist out of me, which inevitably caused some people to clutch their pearls and, sink to their sink back. But, what I meant is that I didn't see it as at odds with my faith, but rather that this was the invitation of my faith, that following Jesus led me and to care about this. And I feel that way really about a lot of what we have talked about and what we are even carrying with us right now. It was following Jesus that led me to care about climate change and about murdered and missing Indigenous women and about affirming the belovedness of LGBTQ plus siblings and following Jesus that made me care about justice and borders and pronouns and fiscal policy and maternal health care and, to grapple with privilege and, good food, right? All of these different kinds of things that are still compelling me, to engage not from a place of overwhelm and fear, but of possibility, because I see in that vision from Jesus this reawakening, a recovering, restoration even of a gospel of love, right? And that's where I learned it. That's, for better or worse, Rachel Held Evans used to say, this is a story I'm still willing to be wrong about. And like, I'm pretty deeply embedded in it at this point. But I think that there's a possibility of real love and hope for us in that way of life. And so the issues will always be there, I guess, is if I'm trying to land the plane. The issues are there and they matter because they're people. And they matter because we love God and we love one another. And the pathway then is not to care less, but to care more and to enter into a lifestyle and a pathway and a mode of flourishing that feels unforced and genuine, of walking with Jesus and walking with each other. If that made any sense whatsoever. So Brandan, please rescue me, come in with something wise to say.
Well, no, Sarah, I love that because, it just reminds me so much of, I love the name of the organization, Red Letter Christians, because it just brings you right back to, okay, think about what are the things that Jesus said, end of story almost.
I know. I just think that root of, love and belovedness, it's the gospel, right? As I learned it, sometimes for better or worse, that width and breadth and length and depth of the love of God that sets us free, that never steals and kills and destroys us, that brings abundant life, that restores souls and opens lives, is never dull or restrictive, right? And so, yeah, I don't know. I think that's where I landed anyway. So
great. Brandan, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know how to follow up both of those brilliant responses. And I actually don't think I'm going to say much different. I don't know if there's one issue I would name as like the issue we need to be focusing on, but I do think one issue that makes things a lot worse is our propensity to polarize and demonize and refusal to listen to one another across our deepest divides. And I experience that viscerally every day living 6 blocks from the White House here in Washington, D.C. I'm always around the politics and even just watching friend groups in DC interact and people of different political parties not being willing to talk to each other, like literally in a bar, in a restaurant, not willing to engage, just is a symptom of what we see happening on social media, what we see happening in every other aspect of our lives. And as hard as it is to engage with people that we believe are wrong, as hard as it is to engage with people that might have even harmed us or be perpetuating systems that harmed us, I think the only way that we can actually make progress and bring healing in society is if we find ways to transform hearts and minds. And the way you transform hearts and minds isn't through demonizing. It's not through debate. It's through being able to see one another as human beings, to understand how somebody gets to what they believe or how they vote based on their life experience. And when we can relate to each other from that empathic place of understanding, that's when we can actually convince people of different ways of thinking. We can ourselves be challenged to nuance how we see the world. And I am really guilty at, I found myself over the past 2 years of the pandemic in particular, like being pulled into the polarized fray. And I spend a lot of time on TikTok, for instance, and on these social media platforms, it's really easy to become very binary, to see things as black and white, to begin demonizing people. And I've caught myself doing that time and time again and realizing that's only furthering the divide. That's only pushing us further from progress. That's only keeping us from bringing about Jesus's vision of the kingdom of God on earth as it is in heaven. And so I just really hope for my own life and for all of us collectively that we can stop demonizing people, and that we can start seeing people as they are, even if we find them their views offensive. If we can at least figure out how to relate to each other as humans across these divides, I think that's where the healing of our country, of our world, can begin.
Amen. Amen. So next up, I'd love for each of you to kind of share the looking forward view. I love watching all of you to see what new things you're going to come up with next. So, I won't ask you to divulge anything that can't be divulged publicly, but I would love to hear about, any new projects, books, thoughts, other things that you're working on, and we'll see later on. Sarah, would you like to start us off on that one?
Sure. It's better to go first in this crowd, I've learned. Get done. I think that right now I'm actually really excited about a lot of the work that we're engaged with. It feels like a bit of a busy season, but it's been really, rewarding. So one of the spaces where I lead is called Evolving Faith. And we are planning our next big conference gathering. It'll be live virtual again this year. We'll have tickets on sale here in a couple of weeks, but it's on October 14th and 15th. Just super excited about the guides and the teachers and the community. We are launching like a whole online, community. I think that a lot of us have found kind of a season of faith shift, or, I don't know if maybe deconstruction is kind of the word right now, but like it's a profoundly lonely and isolating experience for a lot of people. And so making things, a little more friendly and free. Hopefully we'll be part of that. We've got a new season of the podcast coming. I don't know why writers are expected to talk quite as much as we are, but this is a place where I've landed. And then I'm working on a new book, actually. It's meant to be sort of this field guide for an evolving faith, just kind of an exploration of the principles and practices and postures, maybe even the prayers, knowing me, that I have found really helpful and necessary during that season. And so hopefully that'll be coming in the next, year or two as well. So yeah, it's been a busy time and a really sacred and good time. It's good to have your, good work with good people, to put your hand to. So
absolutely.
Yeah, that's what I'm monkeying around with these days.
Absolutely. Well, please keep us posted.
Yeah.
Brandan, how about you?
Yeah, it's a busy season, as mentioned many times. I think there's three big things on the horizon for me right now. One, in January, we launched a virtual faith community called Metanoia. And so we've been joining together 2 Sundays every month with folks from all around the world, and just really creating space for people who have not felt comfortable going back into church spaces and are wanting to explore what it looks like to be a follower of Jesus in our modern world. And so we're going to continue to grow and evolve that community and start all sorts of kind of new programs around that online for those folks. So I'm really excited about that. And then in October, I have a book coming out called Dry Bones and Holy Wars. And basically it's reflections. It's similar to Filled to be Emptied in the sense that both of these books come from the Trump era, these 4 years that were really eye-opening for me and woke me up from a lot of my own complacency around all sorts of issues that we are facing collectively. And so this book is kind of a series of reflections that I wrote throughout that era, and is meant to provoke people to spiritual and social renewal. And then a big book project that will come out in about 2 years. I'm going to be basically working on a memoir of what has happened in my life over the past 15 years of being a fundamentalist evangelical 15 years ago through the deconstruction process, and trying to help people begin to think through what it looks like to reconstruct their faith on the other side. And so we're just in the early stages of that, and I'm really excited to get to have that own space to reflect on my own journey and get to share that with others. So
wonderful. We'll look forward to all those things, Brandon. Willard, what's next for you? You're very entrepreneurial. I know you've got lots of different directions, so I'd love to hear what's next.
So considering that I have retired from full-time academia, I'm probably teaching more than I did when I was doing full-time academia, just at different places for a whole lot less more money, whole lot less more money. But that's another conversation. I love teaching in its various forms. I'm have a full-time practice as a psychoanalyst, marriage and family therapist. Opened up a new office in Upper Montclair. It's been super busy. I've been really blessed. People have been coming for a couple of reasons. When they say, wow, you're a Christian therapist. Yay, I've been trying to find one. Yay, 'cause we can talk Bible and theology and spirituality and amen, hallelujah. And also, you're a black guy, so I want to hear from a black perspective and so forth and so on. A number of interracial relationships, particularly in the geography where I'm located. And so being able to come and have a conversation around what does it mean to be in an interracial relationship or a blended family or both. And what are the challenges? What are also the joys of that? So being able to help people navigate through that lens on what is life like for them. So I've been doing that. But I think more recently, I've really, really, really jumped into dealing with this beyond the protest. There's an app that's coming out soon, hopefully the next month or two. May even start a movement around it. And this concept through this particular app and movement is trying to create opportunities for servant leaders within the black community. And I'm very conscious that we're going to target the black community in that regard, because history and the current realities are very clear. People cannot wait for others to help. It doesn't happen. I'd like to say it happens. We all get together, the Rodney King moment. Can't we all get along? But people go into their own little silos and look out for themselves. And so I think saying to the black community, we have to help ourselves. And there's a lot of rich resources of all sorts that we can call upon, and we can be with each other and help each other out. And again, going beyond the protest, going beyond the storm the castle and let them know things are not right. Well, how do you make them right? What are the concrete ways in which that we can make a difference in the lives of our children, our children's children, and to be a nonviolent, and we're real clear, to be a nonviolent place where people are heard, they're honored, they're helped, and hopefully they're healed. And I think that, again, one size doesn't fit all. I think there's some things that are specific to the African diaspora, the black community, that need to be addressed in ways that are not being addressed currently, or not taught in grad school, not a lot of books around them. There's some popular books, but some of those still miss the mark on some very key places. So Beyond the Protest looks at that. And then I'm coming out with a Dr. Will app, if you will. And that's more around dealing with mental health. And that one is more global in nature. It's trying to help people post-pandemic, if you will. I think we want to go into a space and a place of global depression and high anxiety. And to think otherwise isn't realistic. And so how do we, as Christians, as faith leaders, address the depression that's going to come? Why do you say that? Because you're going to go back to your church building, go back to your synagogue, and realize things are not the same. They will never be the same. There's going to be a lot of loss and grief around those issues. And I do a lot of support groups with faith-based leaders who went through the anxiety of vaccination, no vaccination. Do you wear a mask? Do you not wear a mask? How do you repurpose the church in light of the new realities? And so dealing with those concretely is going to be a challenge for us. We're going to be glad we don't have to wear a mask anymore, But that's also going to create, again, depression and some anxiety. So I'm going to try to address those things through this app and to provide a place of information and inspiration and see what happens.
Wow, good for you. Like I said, I know you'd have multiple things going on, Willard. It's always just so fun to hear about them. And please let me know how we can utilize the Publishing in Color platform too to help, build awareness around some of those things. So we'll touch base, again on that, please. So for me, a couple different things. One is that we have the second volume of How to Heal Our Divides coming out next month, with a whole new set of, I think it's about 27 different contributors to the book. Again, the primary focus is on organizations that are actually doing something to heal different types of divides, racial, political, religious, internal, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm very excited about that. Also in May, we'll have an online writers conference. Brandan's going to be one of the participants, one of the speakers at that, which I'm really thrilled about. In June, we'll be doing our first in-person writers conference for the last 2+ years in Denver, Colorado, with Barbara Brown Taylor and Philip Yancey being the headline speakers for that. And then back on this, compassionate Christianity front, next week we will have 2 more webinars. On Tuesday, we'll have Matthew Paul Turner, Kirsten Powers, and Mickey Scott Bay Jones. And on Thursday, we will have Leah Gunning Francis, Mark Feldmeyer, and Daniel Bowman Jr. So looking forward to those conversations as well. So Willard, Brandan, Sarah, thank you all so much for joining us. It's just such a pleasure to spend time listening to you, learning from you guys. Really appreciate you spending some time with us to do that, because I know you have all busy schedules. So thank you so much.
Thanks for inviting us. Good to see you all.
Thanks, everyone. Hope to see you next week.